So as I said last time, in this final unit, what we're doing is I said we're trying to investigate the status of the things that we've been looking at. Rhetoric, rationality, and argumentation. What roles should these things play in our lives? How much should we care about them? Are they good or bad? Are they inherently good or bad? Is it how they are used? What's going on here? I called these kind of meta-level questions. And we're going to continue on in that vein by, inquiring into the status of what we might call rationality or rationalism. Rationalism in philosophy has a few different definitions. As an epistemological view, that is, as a theory of knowledge, rationalism is the view that we should use reason, critical thinking, our faculties, in order to come to a knowledge of the universe around us. So this was the view that was held by Descartes. And he thought that the products of reason and of rationality were more firm, they were more foundational, they should be relied on more than perhaps knowledge that we get from other sources, like a gut feeling or an intuition, or what we receive from our senses, right? Which he doubted and questioned a lot. But rationalism, more broadly construed, you might say is kind of an orientation towards life, or a philosophy of life. Do you all know anybody who tries to live their life in the most rational way possible, and they're always trying to be rational and logical? Well, we're going to be investigating today whether that is how we should think and live. Because if you don't know anybody like that, I assure you they're out there, right? And you may have heard people at least try to talk up rationality in conversation or debate, where they say things like, be rational, you're not being reasonable, so on and so forth. So, just as we ask these questions of rhetoric, we're going to do this with a few of the other things we've been exploring in this class. So much of what we have been looking at and what we have been employing has used or relied upon reason, right? We looked at what makes an argument a good argument. We explored a bunch of different examples of people using logic and argumentation, logos, in practice. And I tried to get you all to reflect on, are these good arguments? Are they true? Are they well supported? Use your critical thinking skills, right? I said this to you over and over and over again. Generally speaking, since its inception and its emergence in ancient Greece thousands of years ago, philosophy has been concerned with the proper use of reason and using reason to figure all this stuff out. The natural sciences, as an outgrowth of philosophy more generally, also privilege the use of reason, right? They have a particular method, the scientists, that they utilize in order to learn more about the world. They come up with a hypothesis, right? Which is supposed to make some sort of prediction. They design an experiment. They run the experiment and observe it. They analyze the results. And then they do the whole process over again, right? This is what the project of science is. It's the use of this thing called the scientific method to try to understand the empirical reality that we observe. This is a rational process. This is a logical process. And other intellectuals are using their reason to do stuff like this too, right? Like the mathematicians or the physicists who are trying to uncover how ultimate reality works and why. how different theorems are related to one another, and how they imply or entail other things. So, in a lot of academic fields, there is a privileging, or at least a utilization of reason. Have you ever stopped to wonder whether or not that's a good thing? Whether or not we should be privileging rationality in our investigations of the world? Whether or not we should be privileging rationality in how we live? Should we be guided by reason in all things, or not? How big of a role should it play in our lives? Well, that is what we're exploring today. Plato had, a rather high view of rationality and reason. Much like Descartes, he thought that our senses could not get us to the ultimate truth of reality, so we need to use our reason. We need to engage in philosophy and reflection. The scientists also kind of agree with this, because they're going to say, well, it doesn't matter what your personal experience is. Can we run the experiment? Can it be replicated? Right? Is this something that we can all see? Is this well supported by the data? So on and so forth. So, at its inception, and during the Enlightenment, and today, reason is very important to how people investigate things. But there have always been those in the medieval ages, for example, today, throughout history, who have questioned the place of reason in our lives. You could call these people the irrationalists. They may have privileged a different epistemological view of how we come to learn about how the universe is like. Or generally, they may have thought that reason was not as important or integral to what our lives should be like compared to what some of the intellectuals have thought throughout history. The piece that I asked you to read today was an entry on this movement or school of thought that is known as irrationalism. Irrationalists have been around since, the beginning of philosophy and perhaps all of human history. But irrationalism as a movement started to gain a lot of steam during the 19th century. What was this movement? Well, it was a way of thinking and a way of being which thought that reason has limits. Reason cannot do everything. Reason cannot uncover everything. There are aspects of life in the universe that are insulated from reason. And perhaps reason should not be our guiding star. It shouldn't be the thing that our lives revolve around. Thus, the irrationalists privileged feeling and passion, instinct and intuition over trying to be a cold, calculating machine. Can you think of why there might be good reason, to think and behave like this? Do you all think reason can uncover everything in human life? If you just use reason properly, can you figure out how everything works?
Well, I think reason's based off of experience to some extent.
Okay.
So if you don't experience anything, then what are you going to base your reason off of?
Yeah, that's a good point. So maybe we should get out there and experience stuff, and then we'll have more to use, more to investigate, more to... Yeah, sure. Okay, what do the rest of y'all think? Do you think if you were just a cold calculating machine, you'd be able to understand how all of this works? I see some shaking of heads. Okay. Do you want to be a cold calculating machine? Do you want to be rational in all that you do? Why not? I see some of you shaking your heads. Why not? Wouldn't that be a noble thing? Being rational? Why don't you want to be rational in all that you think and do?
Well, maybe sometimes the rational thing isn't the best thing to do.
Okay, sometimes the rational thing isn't the best thing. Like what? Could you provide an example?
No, I can think of one, but
Yeah?
Okay, so for me, like, the rational decision for me is to commute here. But, because I save a lot of money.
Sure.
But I don't want to commute anymore because it's like, it's, hassle or whatever. And that's like, I don't know where I was going with that.
But you feel that...
I feel like
Yeah.
it's better, like I'll feel better.
You feel better, right? You feel like maybe doing the rational thing, the objectively rational thing, maybe that's not going to be good for you. Or you don't want to do it, right? Yeah.
I also feel like with being rational about something, like you can come up with a reason to do anything. Like Hitler had a reason to kill. Anything rational, like if you're looking at it like that, like
Yeah.
then I don't think that there's using reasons to justify something. You're losing out on that morality or like what constitutes a good reason.
Okay, so yeah, there are a few different points that y'all are bringing up and implying here that are really good that we should explore. So, what you just brought up was anything can be rationalized, right? I can rationalize why I should break up with my girlfriend. You can rationalize why eating 3 pieces of cake is actually good for you. You can rationalize why spending money on Coke is actually better for you than paying for a therapist. Right? You can rationalize that. But what the irrationalists are trying to get at least one of the things they're trying to explore, is this idea that reason is not able to explain and justify everything. It can't do that job. I think they would conceive of reason as something like a tool. But reason can't be our guiding star or our ultimate value. We might be able to use reason to do some awesome things, but in other words, there's more to life than reason. In fact, we might say that the best things in human life are not within the category of the rational. Is watching a beautiful sunset and being moved by that and having a spiritual experience, is that a rational thing? The love that you feel for your partner, is that a rational thing? You might be able to rationalize it, right? But is it a product of reason? I would say no. I mean, we have this dichotomy in the West between logic and emotion, right? And we use this to criticize people. We're like, oh, you're just overcome by your emotions. You need to be more reasonable. Or quit being so reasonable, like, feel with me. I want a vent. I don't want a solution. Right? There are things in life that, well, they just don't have the ontological status of being rational. And we might also say that reason or rationality needs something else in order to be utilized properly. Can reason alone tell you how it is that you're supposed to act? Now, this is kind of a tricky question. Because you might say yes. You might say, yeah, I can reason my way to how I'm supposed to live, what I'm supposed to do.
But you also need to empathize with other people and how their actions would affect somebody else.
Yeah.
I think that if you just solely rely on rationality to make decisions, it's kind of like Machiavellian. And you can, like, just because something's good, just because something's good for you doesn't mean that it's good for everybody else. So you might have to, like, what's the most rational course of action? You might have to do something like hurtful in order to get that action.
Sure, yeah. And we see people behave like that all the time, right? What I'm trying to get at is reason can be a good and powerful thing. I think everybody would recognize that. But you might make the further claim and say, in order to orient it or use it properly, you need to have a certain set of values. So many thinkers throughout history are going to argue that these ultimate values that you should be embodying and pursuing are not the things that you can reason to or ultimately justify. So that is something that's worth thinking about, right? The irrationalists are going to say, yes, reason has its place, but it's not the be-all, end-all of human life. In fact, they're going to say the stuff that we would call non-rational or irrational perhaps is the stuff that actually matters. The stuff that gives us meaning and fulfillment. Like being moved by Chopin. Or having a spiritual experience in church. These things transform lives. Right? These things give us meaning and purpose. Are they rational? Well, the people who experience them are not going to say, yeah, my reason made me feel this way and my experience was rational and yeah. No, they're not going to say that. Right? They're going to say, I had this feeling or I had this intuition. Oh, I was moved in this way. They would use non-rational language and descriptors for this experience, right? You may be able to rationalize a bunch of things that on the surface look irrational. But the irrationalists are going to say, the things that should ultimately matter to us are not the outputs of reason. They extend beyond the category of the rational or the irrational, perhaps. Playing an awesome chess game. Being moved by a video game. The feeling that you get when you've finished a really hard project or when you've met a goal for yourself. Those passions, those feelings, those movements, the irrationalists are going to say that's what you should be pursuing, that stuff. Yeah, you can use reason to do cool stuff in your life, but reason by itself is not valuable. Use reason to get to that stuff, the stuff of human life. That's what matters. Now, obviously, you can go too far in that direction, right? Somebody who is trying to be overly rational in all that they do, well, their relationships probably aren't going to be the best. Right? Have you ever had this conversation? Oh my goodness, I have this problem in my life. Oh, here's how you should solve it. I don't want you to solve it. I just want to talk to you and vent to you. Why do you try to solve everything? Well, solving, it's the rational thing to do, right? I'm offering you a solution. A lot of people just don't want to hear reason. They don't want that. And if you're overly rational, well, you can get lost easily in never making a decision, right? Because you never have a complete set of information. If you're trying to figure out rationally how to live, there comes a point where you just have to irrationally stop thinking and make a decision. Right? Because you're never going to have a complete picture of how everything works, about how things are going to go, about what you need to make an informed choice. Right? So, it's easy to see that if you're overly rational, that can alienate you from people, that can prevent you from living a full and fulfilled life. But the same thing is true of irrationalism, right? If you're somebody who has really gone off the deep end on that side of the spectrum, and you're like, reason sucks, never using reason again, I hate reason, I'm never going to think, I'm just going to impulsively do whatever my instincts tell me to do, well, you could see how that might land you in trouble as well, right? Maybe it causes you to make a stupid decision and you get really hurt, right? Oh, I'm just feeling like I really want to do a speedball right now. And then you end up in the hospital, Oh, I'm just feeling, that I really want to break up with my partner of 3 years, even though everything is great, because I just really want to have sex with this random person. Probably not a great decision. I don't know. Maybe it is for you, though. This movement arose out of a very real historical time in which reason and rationality was being privileged in philosophical and scientific inquiry. So many of those within the Enlightenment, like Descartes, like Locke, and other thinkers who were using and privileging reason, they had this sense that if we could just make people more rational, if we could get people to give up irrationality and give up faith, that we'd be able to usher in a golden age of humanity. But I think a lot of people are correct in saying that hasn't happened. Like, reason has not solved all of our problems. It may be that it's actually impossible for us to be completely rational and be rational all the time. We are pushed and pulled by these forces and motivations that, ontologically speaking, are not rational. They are irrational or non-rational, which is different to say they are irrational. Right? Like stupid or wrong. Your feeling of anger may not be stupid or wrong, but it's non-rational, right? It has a non-rational cause. So, what the irrationalists are trying to get us to see is there are weaknesses and shortcomings with living your life in this way, by trying to be a cold calculating machine, by privileging reason in all that you do. And to try to achieve balance, they're trying to swing the pendulum the other way, back towards feeling, passion, intuition. This kind of disposition, or this belief in the value of non-rational things, has been around for a long time. We see it in ancient Greek society, in ancient Roman society. We see it today. We can trace it back to Pindar, Pythagoras, and others. And historically, this tendency or disposition to revel in feeling and emotion and passion has been associated with the ancient god Dionysus, who was like the archetype of ecstasy and theater and emotion. Think winemaking, right? Yeah, winemaking, fertility, all that kind of stuff. Back in the day, there were a lot of different festivals and celebrations held for these gods and goddesses. Well, at the Dionysian festivals, there would be a lot of drinking, there would be a lot of shouting and exuberance. Maybe there would be orgies and things like that. What the Greeks recognized was that these displays of non-rationality had a certain value and purpose within their society. As our society has evolved over the last few thousand years, this kind of belief or this view has dissolved a little bit, right? There aren't really that many holidays or opportunities that we have to engage in activities like this. People might do this stuff privately, but it is not socially encouraged or really accepted, right? Oh yeah, in the 20th of February, we're going to throw rationality to the wind and we're all going to, get drunk and have sex with each other. No, we don't live like that, right, in Western society. And that might be a good thing, in some ways. But the societies that have recognized the value of the non-rational would say it has a certain place, it has a certain role in the smooth functioning of a community or in somebody's individual life as well. Nowadays, it appears that those who have this disposition or this same belief, well, they tend to be like artists, right? Weird hippies. I don't know. People who are trying to engage in creative expression of what they think is alive within them and make that known to the world because they see value and importance in it. Not just being analytical all the time, but engaging in these emotional and passionate activities. Now, even though reason was starting to become privileged and utilized a lot in the ancient world due to the philosophy of Plato, due to his student Aristotle, due to the emergence of Stoicism and skepticism and those philosophical schools, this kind of thread of non-rationalism or irrationalism as a way of thinking or being still persisted. It was not completely snuffed out. As ancient philosophy in the ancient world evolved into what we might call the medieval world, they still retain this insistence on the value and importance of non-rationality in human life and endeavors. We can look at the medieval philosophers like Thomas Aquinas, and then later in the early modern thinkers like Pascal, and in the existentialist thinkers like Kierkegaard and Nietzsche. So many of these thinkers saw what the Greeks once saw, and they realized that there were certainly limits to what reason could do for us and what reason could provide for us. Pascal is famous, for example, for his wager. Is this something that you've ever heard of? Pascal's wager.
Yeah.
Pascal said the following: nobody has proof that God does or does not exist. But by living your life, by taking the actions that you do, you're placing a bet either on God's existence or God's non-existence. By existing, you are wagering. And so he asks the reader to reflect on, what wager should you make? If you don't know that God exists, or that God does exist, if you don't have proof either way, if there are arguments on both sides, how should you live? Well, he says that you should wager that God exists. That's how you should live. You have infinite to gain if God does exist, and you do believe in Him. Finite to lose if you believe in Him and He doesn't exist. Infinite to lose if He does exist and you don't believe in Him. Right? Because of the whole heaven and hell thing. So on and so forth. The same kind of idea was picked up by Kierkegaard in his existentialism, where he says that you have to decide how you are going to live and what you're going to value. Are you going to privilege reason in your life, or are you going to privilege faith? Are you going to privilege science, or are you going to privilege religion? And he says you cannot ultimately justify either of these life paths. Why? Well, let's say you're trying to choose between them. The reasonable life and the faithful life. What criteria are you using to adjudicate between them? Let's say you're like, I'm going to choose the reasonable life because it's reasonable and being reasonable is good. He's like, why do you think being reasonable is good? What led you to that view? And you're just like, well, I just think being reasonable is good. Okay, so you have faith that being reasonable is good. Do you have an ultimate epistemic justification for why reason is what you should live according to? He's going to say no, and you don't have one for the either one either. You're just forced to make a choice. You got to make a choice on how to live, and you're going to affirm that choice with every decision that you make. You don't know ahead of time which life you should live, which is going to be successful for you, whether or not God exists. But you're stuck making this choice. Now he says we should make the leap of faith, and we should trust in God. He thinks that this would be good, but he recognizes that this choice is not something that can be ultimately justified. The choice is going to be made on the basis of your values and foundational beliefs, which at some point you just accept because you think that they're good, full stop. We still see this privileging of faith, of trust, this prioritization of transcendent things that we cannot rationalize or completely comprehend in religion and spirituality across the globe, whether it's Buddhism or Christianity, Taoism, so on and so forth. And so it still has a profound influence on how people think and live and act today, even though a lot of our academic circles tend to lean onto the side of reason, right, and rationality. But even our modern philosophy and our social and political theory nowadays questions the value and importance of living your life according to reason. The American pragmatists, for example, they came to recognize that, like, look, we can ask questions all day about what is true, but, we can't really get to the bottom of that. So we should just basically do the things that are useful and good. Like, that's what we should do. Like, what works. That's going to be our justification. We'll just do what works. Even though we can't divine some ultimate epistemic justification for all of these things. Or we could look at Henri Bergson or Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophies. Bergson put forth this view known as vitalism, in which he argued that the universe is one giant evolving system that is powered by this force of energy that is rational and moving it towards perfection. And that the way that we should live our lives is to get in touch with this primal energy or force and express it and embody it. Whoa! Very passionate, you might say spiritual philosophy, rather than I divide the world up into numbers and categories and reason and science and bobbity-boobity. Same thing with Nietzsche. Nietzsche thought that in the course of Western history, reason, rationality, the Apollonian spirit, what people were leaning way too much into that, and they had lost their connection with the Dionysian spirit. Emotion, passion, intuition. The stuff that really moves us. The stuff that really guides our actions. And he thought that people had become weak and cowardly and pitiful because they had leaned too far into this reason thing and become colonized by it, that they lost courage and they lost passion. And they lost some strength and independence. And finally, most recently, we could talk about existentialism, which is going to say, basically, your view of the world and your interpretation of it is the result of a free choice that you make. And it is up to you to kind of decide what kind of life you want to live, what values you are going to pursue, what you are going to serve, what your life is going to revolve around. You have to make that decision. That's not a decision that you can escape from. And this decision is not one that you can ultimately justify or prove. It's one that you have to make. We still see this questioning of reason's place and importance in the philosophy and politics of today. Critical theory, for example. If you dig deep into this school of thought, you'll see that it thinks the privileging of reason and rationality has been bad for people. It has marginalized and oppressed people. It has been used as an instrument for exploitation. And so they say in their research, they question the primacy of reason in the West, the rational data. And they say, if you just look at that stuff, you're missing out on people's lived experiences and how they actually understand and interpret what is happening to them. And you actually need to pay attention to that stuff. Throughout Western history, there have been all of these promptings and prescriptions that we should be reasonable, that we should be rational. But there have been a few different thinkers who have shown that actually trying to force people to think or live like this has been bad, and it has resulted in a lot of conflict and death and chaos. Some of these pieces of evidence are revealed in this Vox article, The Myth of Rational Thinking. In this article, the author, I believe, interviews philosopher Justin E.H. Smith, who wrote a book on this subject, basically analyzing how humans think, how humans live, and how these pushes throughout history to get people to be rational have resulted in explosions of irrationality that have harmed people and that have brought about death and destruction. He says, the story of logical humans preserving through history and leaving irrationality and superstition behind is a myth. It's not as if we have left ideological possession and irrationality and superstition behind. It's still very much a part of people's lives today. And it has been such an enduring part of history that many have argued that humans have an intrinsic religious disposition or superstitious disposition, and that this is not something that we can actually eliminate. And so he cautions against trying to get people to behave like cold calculating machines. He says people don't behave like this, they can't behave like this, it's not good for them to behave like this, and trying to force them into this way of being all the time results in bad consequences. He offers a few different examples. He talks about the cult of Pythagoras that arose in ancient Greece, this group or school of people that thought if they could understand all the relationships between the numbers and mathematics, they could divine the truths of the cosmos, and in essence, they started kind of worshiping math. Well, the problem is that although they started out kind of rational and logical, thinking the universe could be described in mathematical terms and doing investigations into that, it turned into this weird cult thing for some of them. Another example he brings up, and I'm going to butcher this woman's name. Degauche? I don't know French. Anyway, this woman who was women's rights activist who championed this idea that women should be able to vote and be able to do all these things that men can do, using very rational arguments to support her views. Well, people didn't like that, and what happened to her? She was put to death. Trying to get people to recognize and embody rationality can lead to these outbursts of irrationality. That is Smith's general claim. Karl Marx was famous for formulating his theory of historical materialism, in which he thought that the evolution and operations of human societies followed certain principles and laws that could be studied and that could be predicted. He hypothesized that the contradictions within capitalist systems would bubble over and inevitably produce a bunch of revolutions across the globe in which the proletariat would overthrow their capitalist oppressors. And he thought that this was good and that this should happen, and eventually it would usher in the stateless, classless, communist society at the end of history. But this hasn't happened, right? Revolutions have happened, but not as many as the early Marxists thought were going to happen. And those revolutions did not go very well. Marxism was an ideology that was based on not only this belief that the universe could be described in rational terms and lived in that way, but that communism was the rational end and goal of human society. And getting people to try to follow that, pushing people into that. I mean, how much death did that result in the 20th century? You could look at China or the former Soviet Union, other Central American or South American countries. So if Smith is right, and some of the philosophers that we've been looking at are right, rationality is important. But maybe we shouldn't make our lives revolve around it. But I don't know, you're going to have to make up your mind about this, right? Smith says, and I think a lot of other thinkers would agree with him, we should attempt to live a life that balances rationality and irrationality. that employs them in the appropriate situations in which they should be employed. We shouldn't try to get rid of one or the other, dissolve what is rational in us or dissolve what is irrational in us, but embody them in proper degrees and in proper situations. So although we have been utilizing rationality, we have been talking about how it's important, I have been at least implicitly supporting this idea that critical thinking is good, logical analysis is good. There are very good reasons to question that. To question whether or not you should live like that and think like that all the time. These are just a few of the critiques that we've seen pop up against this privileging and valuing of reason. So what do you all think of this? Do you agree? Disagree? What thoughts are coming up for you?
I think it's a good point that you have to balance the rational with the irrational, because a lot of what you have to do as a human is not entirely rational.
Can you give an example?
Like I was thinking, people who pursue careers that are lower paying because they
Like me.
enjoy them a bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm certainly not doing this for the money. Yeah. Okay, so there are things that we have to do, or maybe that we should do, that aren't purely rational?
Yeah, that are like part of the human experience.
Okay. Besides pursuing a job, what else? What else would you say is valuable or meaningful that we should pursue that isn't rational?
Like maybe the emotions you feel when you see someone you love, or like a child or something.
Like you shouldn't try to rationalize those things?
Yeah.
You should just like enjoy them?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Like if you think of like mothers with little infants, it's like it would be a lot easier to just throw the infant out and keep living your life, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
There's something about being human that doesn't let you do that.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I definitely think it's important just to like, not like do whatever you want, but definitely don't like do everything rationally. Because like, I mean, if you do everything rationally, you're just gonna be boring, and like, I guess, and, like.
You're gonna be boring?
Yeah, you're gonna be boring, and just like, you're not really gonna. You might have a few friends, but like those friends are also gonna be boring, and your whole life's just gonna be really boring. And while, I mean, sometimes you have to do boring things, like, it's important to get a little bit of spice in your life, I suppose.
Okay. So maybe the hyper-rational life is a very boring life.
Mm.
Do y'all agree with that? Or not? I don't know. I mean, I haven't tried to really live a hyper-rational life, but yeah, maybe I'd find it kind of sucks.
I
I
mean,
don't
it's like if you and your friends want to go bowling, I guess if you're rational, you'd be like, oh, well, we should actually stay home because it's a lot safer. And then you just stay home and do a whole lot of nothing. You know?
Okay. Yeah, so maybe sometimes leaning too far into it can prevent you from having experiences, from living, from making memories. I'm sure that's happened to a lot of people, right? They rationalize why they should stay in, or why they shouldn't go out, or why they shouldn't go on that trip. And maybe that's the smart thing to do, actually, sometimes, right?
I mean, the people who didn't get on the Titanic, I mean.
Right, yeah. I mean, Yeah, we don't know exactly what life is going to throw at us or what's going to happen.
But if you live life in fear, have you really lived your life at all?
Yeah? Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, what do the rest of y'all think? Yeah.
Like, if you go to like a car dealership and like, I mean, you have the money for a cool car and you have a good credit score or whatever, you can get a good rate. But you're like, well, you know, maybe I should get like a Camry. Well, Camry's nice, but like it's reliable or whatever. But you could get.
It might not be the coolest, right?
Yeah, right. But it's like, or you could get a Corvette.
It's no '67 Stingray, that Camry, but.
Yeah. So like you have to like think about it. You're like, well, like I really want that car, but I want like the reliability of the Camry or whatever. But sometimes like you're missing out on all like the fun you can have with the Corvette and like all the memories you can make. But then if you go with the Camry, like you're saving so much money. Like you don't have to put as much down. Like you're saving money on gas. But sometimes it's more about like the experience you have. And if you think about it too, like every commute you will have will be more fun with the Corvette.
Yeah.
So like
yeah.
it's a good, you have to like you can go with the middle ground. Like I can't really think of an example. Like maybe a WRX or something. Like something in the middle. Like it's kind of like that's the example I can think of. Be good that way.
Yeah, maybe you agree with what some of them are saying. Like it's about balancing it in your life, right? Maybe sometimes you make the rational choice. Maybe sometimes you don't rationalize everything and you don't think too hard about it. I don't know. What do y'all think about that? Or do you think, no, you should think hard about everything?
Well, first of all, thinking takes time. So it's
Yeah.
You might need to make like a second decision. You don't have the time for it. But even it's just like if you carefully plan, if you carefully plan out every second of every day, which I used to try and do, and I still do to an extent. When something goes wrong, because evidently something is going to go wrong, then you're going to be upset, and that's going to happen every single day, and it's just going to be a constant cycle of disappointment. So it's like you shouldn't set yourself up for that disappointment every single day.
There have been philosophies of life that have emerged that tell us to live in a way that is very different than this logical, planning, thinking, controlling way that we are conditioned into living in our society. I mean, think about what we are raised to believe in and do. We're taught, okay, you got to go to school. You got to do well in school. You got to study. You got to work your ass off. High school is a stepping stone, so you could get into a good college. What do you do in college? Well, you got to go to college to get a degree. You got to work hard. Major in something that's going to bring you good money. Why? So that you can get a great job or internship after college. And then you're going to work at that for a long time. You're going to work hard. You're going to get your promotions. Bada bing, bada boom. You'll be able to afford the house in the suburbs with the white picket fence. That's going to be your life. That's what you should do. All this planning, right? All this expectation, all of this, you might say, forcing or meddling. The Eastern philosophy of Taoism is completely different. It's the opposite side of that. The Taoists would say, don't force or worry or really think hard about anything. Just go with the flow. If you're hungry, eat. If you're tired, sleep. Don't make yourself do things. That doesn't work. Learn how the universe works so that you can act at the right moment with the least amount of effort to attain your goals. That's what they would say. And so they'd say all of this controlling and planning and conceptualizing, that stuff is going to just bring you stress and anxiety. Don't try to plan your whole day. Just see where it takes you. Don't worry about what to major in. Just pursue what you want to pursue. to our Western mind, this seems kind of naive, right? Because life often has other plans. But if Alan Watts and other thinkers are right, this way of thinking and being has provided a lot of peace, security, and, well, cultural marvels in the East for a long time. So, I definitely don't want to poo-poo reason too much in this class. This class is called Logic and Argument, right? You're supposed to be learning how to use reason properly and how to construct arguments, and those are important, and you're going to need to be able to do that in your life. So I don't want you to think that I'm, saying it's bad or anything like that. But I hope that I'm giving you another perspective with which to look at this class from and your life from. Another tool in your toolbox, if you will. Another perspective, another view. So, does anybody have any final comments, questions, concerns? Anything at all? That would be boring. Yeah. Yeah.
I would say certain decisions require a lot more difficulty in thinking through than other decisions do. I think that
Yeah.
a healthy mix would be placing emphasis on important decisions and then being casual about more simple things, I guess.
Yeah, so, I don't know, do you have some examples? What should you think hard about, do you think?
Where you're going to set up your forever home. Whereas
Sure.
Where you get your first apartment when you go to college isn't that big of a deal. It's kind of easy to figure that out. Or where you go to college is really important. But once you get there, the dorm building you choose to live in isn't that big of a deal.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So maybe, we should be applying reason in different degrees and planning in different degrees for different things. I think that makes sense. Yeah, I'm not going to think too hard about what I'm having for dinner tonight. I might think harder about what I'm going to assign my students next semester, for their educational and moral development. Yeah, good point. Anything else? Closing thoughts?
I just feel like if you don't take, I feel like rationality versus non-rationality comes down to being safe versus just taking a risk. And,
Okay.
Not only just a coward die 1,000 deaths, but for me at least, I wouldn't have made half of my friends if I would have made rational decisions.
Okay.
And just not done anything. So I feel obviously if I decide we're going to college is a rational decision, but I feel within people communication, you do have some leeway to be non-rational. Not you go to a girl and you sexually assault her. That's not
Right,
but,
right.
You go to a girl and you say hi, they might, or you compliment her, may not be the rational thing to do, but maybe it can lead to something.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe that's something that I'll end on. Life is full of risks, like you said. Rationally speaking, there are going to be some risks you shouldn't take and some risks you should take. But of course, whether or not you think something is rational or not for you is going to depend on a bunch of other things, such as your goals and values and your perspective, so on and so forth. So, if I could get y'all to reflect on what it is that you're trying to achieve and the kind of life that you're trying to live, that will help you evaluate all of the stuff that we're looking at in this last unit. I can't tell you how you're supposed to think about this stuff or what role these things should play in your life. That's something that you're going to have to figure out. Okay. Well, that's all I have. Y'all want to leave a few minutes early today again?
Yeah.
Yeah? Sounds fine? Sounds good? Okay. All right. Well, I will see you on Tuesday. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for coming.